Hi everybody, I'm back again, and tonight I'm reading another chapter of A Voice in the Darkness. For those of you who are just tuning in, I'm currently on chapter 12, which means I'm well into the story by now. So I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to previous broadcasts, to go back and start at the beginning to be able to get caught up on what I'm streaming on. And if the story isn't really your thing, then feel free to go back to even further broadcasts and to even further stories that I've uploaded and listen to them, because there's many stories now and there's many more to come. So without further ado, here is chapter 12 of A Voice in the Darkness. 5 days after the fight, a messenger came to Dolag while he was inspecting troops. "Lord Prince, there are some Nanisas hanging around. They wish to speak to our Yurkwale. They say they want peace." "Are they speaking for Solbana or Golani?" "Lord Prince, they didn't exactly say. I think, though, they only speak for themselves." "Thank you. Go tell your commander to have them escorted in." "What do you think they want?" He looked over at Padra. "I'm not sure, Padja, but I think they want peace and the opportunity to stay here in the land between the rivers." "That's an interesting thought. Shelter the wolves in the cattle barns?" Dolag nodded. "I had thought that too. On the other hand, you see how empty the land is here? Who'll defend it? Who'll even provide anything worth defending? If we can make a bargain with some of these people, a bargain that has some chance of being kept, and we're better off than we were, at least until we can get enough farmers in here to make the difference." Padra frowned. "You have a way about you, you know. You can take a notion that anyone else would say is folly, then explain it in such a way that no sensible man can argue with it. You're going to find a lot of people around you, though, who won't see much beyond Prince Dolag's inviting the savages to stay once he's beaten them." Dolag grinned quickly. "Lord God's toe, Padja, I haven't even met with these fellows yet, let alone spoken to them or made any sort of agreement with them. You've already got me making a bargain with them and knocking my husbands over the head until they go along with it." The Nanisas were 8 in all, though only 3 had been chosen to speak for the lot. The 3 spokesmen seemed to have no visible traits marking them apart from the rest. They were all older men, tough-looking fellows who looked as though they were made of old leather that had seen its share of hard use, but were still up to more. They were all bearded, and even the youngest had a fair share of gray hair. None of them had much command of the Lantha language, but they had pressed a Lantha farmer into service for this purpose. A Lantha who looked as though he expected a little more reward for his service than a merciful quick end. 3 names were spoken. The 3 names were made known: Awil, Modabi, and Sasagai, with the 3rd being the main spokesman. Dolag was now noting some peculiarities. Sasagai had a scar near his left eye, which tended to pull the eye half closed, giving him an evil look. Awil, the youngster, flexed the fingers of his right hand from time to time, as though unused to having no weapon there. Modabi maintained an impassive expression, which occasionally was ruined when he was forced to scratch some sort of itch behind his right ear. Sasagai began with courteous words. "I understand that the Yurkwale is to be congratulated over his recent victory." Dolag nodded his head. "Fortune was with me this time." "Ah, yes, fortune. A fortunate leader attracts more followers than a brave one. If a leader is fortunate, his followers can expect to prosper in his path." "I suppose, but I doubt you've come all this way to congratulate me on my good fortune." Awil's hand flexed. Sasagai showed no sign on his face, but Dolag suspected he ought not to have rushed matters so much. "Ah, yes, our reason for coming. We have spent many many years in this land, many years in which our herds and families have increased. We would much prefer not to leave. Silvana would have preferred not to leave, yet now he's gone. True, true. And there are some Lantha who will not march back to their homes, are there not? Yes, I still have an army to hand. Sasagai made a faint nod of the head, as if accepting a point. Yet there may be another way to be found, if people are willing. You march your army home, who will defend this land? If we come to an agreement, we can swear not to make war against you, or your sons, or your sons' sons. Might not that be worthwhile to you? It could serve, if the situation were other than it really is. The question is not whether you will agree not to fight against me, but whether you will agree to fight for me. Next year, I can expect Uraquil Golani will be coming across the river with his army. It is all well and good to have you not fighting against me, but fighting at the side of my army is even more to be preferred. Mudabai stood straighter and looked very grim. A will's hand flexed several times. You ask much of us, Urkayel, to ask us to fight against our own people. You ask much of me, that you suggest you would be at peace with me, fight against some unknown foe, but would stand aside when the real trouble comes. And do you seriously think that Golani will allow you to remain neutral? He knows two sides, his own and his enemies. If you are to stay in this land, you will have to undergo the same risks that the people of this land undergo. I see. You will allow me to speak a little with my fellows before giving you an answer? For certain. Speak as long as you like, but not for too long. Would it please you if we return tomorrow with our answer? Certainly. Call me when you've reached a decision, and I will come as soon as possible. As they walked away from the meeting, Padra said, I think they'll go for it. They don't really want to pack up and move back over the river. Yes, I think you're right. They'll probably ask for some conditions, but I think I can hold them to the sorts of things I can probably sell to the rest of the Osvans. Then Nanissa's asked to speak to him about mid-morning of the next day. Sasagai's scar was pulling harder on his eye. Today, a sign Doleg suspected that there had been a lot of intense discussion among the Nanissas last night. Will was also holding his right hand in his left, and Doleg wondered if it were some old injury that had brought on the flexing under stress, and if last night's discussions had been wearing on it. You have come to the decision, then? We will make our decision here, today, before you. But we must know things. What will be our status if we agree to your terms? If a farmer comes to our land, the land where we now dwell, and says to us, I am setting my farm here, in your midst, have we any right to tell him no? Or, if we do, will we find your army marching against us? That ought not to happen. There's a good deal of land here between the rivers, which no farmer has claimed. I will give you the right to a certain portion of the land, and no Lantha may establish himself there, for any purpose, without the agreement of whichever Quayle of that land. There will be no slaughter of any Lantha trespassing on your property either. They will be told they are in claimed land and turned back. If they refuse to turn back, a report will be sent to the garrison of whichever town is nearest, and the officer in command will see to their removal. In cases where the local garrison commander's findings are contrary to what you believe to be the case, you may refer to the commander at Elbdarg. If his findings do not satisfy you, you may refer to myself. I shall see to it that the farmers know the agreement we have reached, so that they will not attempt to encroach on you. Neither shall you encroach on the farmers. This includes whatever farmers remain in your claimed territory. I will have peace between the rivers, and if I have to come ask questions, whether it be of the herdsmen or farmers, my questions will be stern. Sasagai's old face went grim. You speak very well here and now, but you will not always be here in this land. You will forbid us to defend ourselves? I forbid war and slaughter in this land. I forbid it to all. If you will be my people, you will have the same rights as any other of my people, no less and no more. It will take time to learn to live so. Agreed. You will see to it that your people do indeed know their rights and duties, and know that for them, the time of enmity between Lantha and themselves is at an end. For my part, I will see to it that those in my land know the same and are willing to treat the Nanisas as neighbors. Fine words, Prince Dolag, from a ruler who knows that he has as his subjects the men of the temperament of Dorshak Sujdag. Sasagai nodded his head sharply. On behalf of my people, I agree. Now about the matter of what land shall be ours. That was not a topic to be covered in a single morning, nor in a single day. Doleg picked one of his officers, a man who he thought could be trusted to be reasonably fair to the people who just a few days ago had been deadly enemies, and gave him some guidelines, particular portions of territory which were to be definitely maintained under Lantha control, and other parts which he wanted under Nanissa control. There are still going to be some disagreements, he told Padra. I hope to keep them to a minimum. Some of the worst, where no agreement can be reached, I'll make a declaration, and live with the petty irritation it causes. Old Scarface was right. If there's going to be some touchy times around here for the next few weeks, if not the first few years. The Nisses won't suddenly learn overnight that they can't turn their herds into some farmer's field because they feel like it. Come to that, there'll be no few Lantha seeing the Nisses as conquered people, open for any kind of sharp dealing and nastiness. Yes, and I've just put a burden on some garrison commanders that a few of them won't be equal to. I'll want to try and pick out men who will have the sense to see that, while they may not like it, it'll make their lives easier if they treat Nanisses like humans. You recall me mentioning Dorshak Sujdag? There's too many of my Lantha subjects have his kind of memory of the Nanissas. The trouble with being pregnant, Hertia complained, is that everyone seems to treat you as if you're made of fragile glass. Are you sure you should be riding, Osbani Hertemini? Are you sure you should be going upstairs, Osbani Hertemini? Are you sure you should be doing so much walking, Osbani Hertemini? I tell you, Gurmia, I'm ready to kick people. And if you say, are you sure you should be kicking people, Osbani Hertemini? I'll start with you. Wouldn't say such foolishness, Hertia dear. I have 5 sisters, 8 pregnancies among them, and every one of them were working in the fields up until the time the baby was delivered. I might suggest, though, that you're refrain from kicking too many people. It would reflect badly on your husband, you know. Just what I wanted to hear. If it's not bad for my unborn children, it reflects badly on my husband. Watch out, Gurmia. I'm wearing my boots. Osbani, if you were to kick me even every 3rd time you threaten to, I'd be constantly walking around black and blue. But suppose we talk about something other than your pregnancy and rob me of my chance to complain? You're cruel, Gurmia. So, shall we talk about my husband and his conquests, all his conquests? Come on, Osbani. You know you don't really think that little of this war. Even you must know the things we've heard, that those Nanisses are a horrible lot. True enough. I was glad to hear of Dolia's first victory, and even gladder to hear about the final fight at the ford. But on the other hand, even you'll have to admit that this fellow Togatai doesn't seem to be the repulsive horror we've heard about. Of course not. He's come to seek the prince's protection. Of course he'll act a lot different than he would if he were out raiding homesteads. That's an interesting notion itself, Gurmia. If a man can learn to act civilized because he needs our protection, would that not argue that any Nanissa could learn to act civilized if he saw a benefit in it for himself? Osmond, you sound like one of those imperial fellows we hear about, who will argue each side of a question with equal feeling, which, to me, means they don't really believe anything. Well, Germia, even you'd have to agree that finding a way to live with the Nanissas would be better than constantly fighting them. If it were possible, Osmond, it would be nice. I don't know how possible it is, though. So, Doleg pushed himself away from the table, holding the map. I think that's the best we can do. Watch posts at all the fords along the most likely routes for an invasion, and a centralized garrison to be able to reinforce at any point. All ready for Golani, and I suppose we can expect him to do something we haven't thought of? You're comfortable with letting those Nanissas handle the watch posts at the fords in their territory? Doleg frowned. I'd be a liar if I didn't admit to an occasional doubt, Padya. But if we're going to start off not trusting them, how are we ever going to build trust? I'd like to change something right away. The fellows who've sworn oaths to us will be called Federated Nanissas, or Federates. Just a tiny little change. But maybe we can eventually make people think they're a little different from those people who've been spreading ruin and destruction across our land. And make sure that we let our own people know that these folks have sworn oaths to us. Which will make them very unpopular with Gulani. I hope our people will see that the Federates will fight for us, because they have no hope of forgiveness with Gulani. I'm also going to urge some of the Federate Yurkoils to send one of their sons each to me to help them learn our ways. Their fathers will understand their sons are hostages for their good behavior. But I'll be careful not to rub their faces in it. These boys will be guests in my court, too. So make sure that nobody misunderstands that. We've got altogether too many people who will see Nanissa and think animal, and come up with all sorts of ways to make their lives miserable. Let some joke get out of hand, and I'll have a dead boy to explain to his father. The trust between us is as fragile as it stands. We need them to help us protect this land, because we'll have some time getting more Lanthas to move in, with Golani across the river. Right. And will you give me some instructions on how to sharpen my sword? Doleg grinned. Sorry, I keep doing that, don't I, Padya? Well, for another subject, how soon will we be able to march for Eldar? Give us a week to finish all the arrangements and assignments you've made there? Padya gestured at the map and explained to the last aristocrat twit why he can't have a more prestigious post, and we can be off. The urgency behind this march was of a different sort than the marching out. The urgency now was mostly to get back to the relative comfort of barracks life. Doleg himself admitted to himself that he was beginning to feel surfeited with riding and camping and fighting. One could almost wish for a rest from fighting, a long rest. News had come filtering up from the Empire, divine pair be praised, that the Emperor had taken a pretty thorough beating at the hands of the Gishnopets. If true, the Empire would have to leave Lengthwheel alone for some time. Then, Gishnopets were always a bigger threat than anything up here in the north. Golani was another matter. Forces under one of his commanders had taken a bad beating, and so it must be demonstrated as soon as possible that he was still supreme. Third God's toe, he, Doleg, stood in the same relation to Golani as the Gishnopets did to Tevatru. Now they could count on raids every year, if not a massive invasion. How hard would the Federates fight against their kin, against the man who had held their oaths up until this year? As much as he told himself that they would not fear to fight against Golani, until the event, he wouldn't know for sure. At last, he and his came within sight of Eldar. It was a sight to cheer a weary soldier, a promise of a good long rest to come. It would be nice to have some sort of expectation of arrest for the prince, but there was little likelihood of that. Though they had demonstrated an ability to defeat the Nanisas, now would come all the fussing and nastiness of the political maneuvering that had to be dealt with. Whose cousin or nephew should be found a place, and what place could be found where he couldn't damage the principality too badly. He was also going to be happy to see Hertia. One of the many couriers had kept the prince in touch with headquarters, and the rest of the principality had brought information that Hertia was expecting, which made the lack of a declared heir not so dangerous. There were larger dangers, the divine parent knew, in declaring someone to be an heir. He did not need another person around whom plots could form. If the child were a son, well, that would be one less worry. If the child were a girl, one might look at the notion of a betrothal, even in the crib. He stopped those thoughts. He'd felt the notion ugly when Tuarda had betrothed singly to Pral. He wouldn't do that until it was utterly necessary. The army spent a few days at Eldberg, resting and recovering. Doleg had to assign garrisons to part of the newly recovered territories, but they held a considerable force back to Eldberg. A large proportion of these were the yearly levies. The men would be released to their yearly occupations as farmers, herders, and so on. That release would be done in Plutarch, and until they came there, these men would be had to be kept out of trouble, which meant keeping them busy. That was the kind of thing that could be left to the unit commanders, for which they didn't need the prince looking over their shoulders. The prince, of course, had other things to keep him occupied. Reports were waiting for him regarding the situation in the northwest, which Halrath was apparently ruling with a firm hand. Reports regarding the situation in the empire. Reports slightly better than informed guesses on the status and intentions of Galani's main force. In addition, informing them that Oring Fa had been captured. The report which had come by the silver lump, said Oring Fa had been found in the house of a certain merchant on information led by a jealous neighbor. There was some question on that the neighbor had actually seen the imperial agent, but there was no question that the merchant had been heard to express on occasion thoughts that the prince was unwise to break away from the empire. One thing that intrigued the investigators was that such comments had not been heard again since the time the imperial soldiers had taken Oring Fa from Doleg's jail. Given the neighbor's information, it was thought wise to search the merchant's house, and a sudden descent on the house eventually uncovered the imperial agent behind a false wall in the closet. Doleg sent back a reply. "Good work! Investigate this merchant and all his friends carefully. The imperial agent may have been doing more than simply hiding." It was an unnecessary caution, of course. The prince's people could be depended upon to investigate thoroughly, but best not take anything for granted. Vangfa had built 3 war galleries, which were at present still berthed in Onstarg, Clownsmouth, waiting for arrangements to move them down to Plutarch. That would have been a simple matter, had the imperial fleet not still controlled the sea. Should Vangfa's ships come down the coast separately, as stealthily as possible? Should they try for long hauls every day, pulling into some sheltered inlet every night? The greatest hazard to them, whether they traveled singly or all together, was that the imperial fleet would come on them. No one deluded themselves that coming on the imperial fleet would be anything short of disaster for their ships. Doleg sent a couple of notes, then put that problem aside. He may not be aware of all his failings, but he knew that he knew next to nothing about naval matters. Best leave that one aside until he got to Plutarch, where he could consult more knowledgeable people. Ought I to be a nagging wife, love, and demand that you take a little time away from official silliness to pay attention to me? Doleg grinned. Ha! Plotting against the principality? Keep the prince so busy with his consort that all the principality goes to rack and ruin because he isn't making decisions? Perhaps the princess consort is going to rack and ruin for want of a few seconds of her husband's attention. Doleg chuckled. Well, I won't promise to reform altogether. There are a lot of things to be done, and altogether too many of them need the prince's approval. Even now I keep being afraid that I'm making a decision here or there based on faulty information, and those decisions are going to turn around and bite me someday. I'll promise to do better, though. Hertha shook her head. I remember my mother sighing in the summer when my father was off dealing with the latest Rushvalati incursion, and sighing all the winter and spring because he was busy making sure the territory was ready to stand them off again next spring. There's always something to take up his time. Seems to me that running the principality would be the same, but more of it. I won't promise never to complain, but I will promise not to make a habit of it. It was a grim and cloudy day, with occasional showers of fine, cold rain, a sign of fall and winter that were approaching. A figure dangling from the giblet accentuated the depressive effect of the weather. You didn't have to come, Dolia. Army punishment doesn't necessarily require the presence of the prince. My mood shows that badly, Padya? I'd say so, yes. Very likely even Gulani, in his tent out on the high plains, knows the Prince Lengthwheel is upset. Surely not that bad, Padya. But I did have to come, you know. This isn't just any punishment. A coming knifing of one soldier by another. That doesn't rate my attention. But when some third godder gets fed up with a tent mate calling him souse and pulls his knife, I think it's time the prince needs to show up and make it plain that he takes this sort of thing very seriously. Huh. You think you'll ever get those two lots to love each other? Love each other? Hardly. All I want is for them to put up with each other at least sufficiently that everyone can trust the man in the rank next to him to do his job. Hating the man at your unshielded side is a bit of a risk when it comes to battle. The worst was yet to come. Borlas met him at the stable doors as he was handing his horse off to a groom. Would you mind stepping aside with me, Lord Prince? Doleg nodded brusquely. Borlas wanting to speak to him in private meant the scholar had bad news. Third God's toe, as if the day needed more bad news. He nodded to the guards. I'll speak to him privately. Lord Prince! The detachment commander acknowledged the order, though Doleg understood what the acknowledgement meant. Princes did not get much in the way of privacy, not with a constant concern for assassination. Even though Doleg trusted Borlas implicitly, the guards dared not to do so. Privately meant a circle of guards around them, some watching Borlas closely, some watching for anyone around them coming too close. Hopefully they were at a distance where a conversation in low tones would not be overheard by the guards. So, what new horrors do you have to tell me? Borlas shook his head. Not new, but one we've been expecting. The shaman's construct is closer. One of the faults of the thing, though only a fault if its makers wished it to move totally unmarked, is the practice of attacking and killing anything that it comes across on its way. Of course, this habit produces disorder and distress wherever the thing travels, which has the benefit, from Gulani's viewpoint, of harming the morale of your people. But this means that the thing creates magical disturbances when it strikes, which disturbances are detectable at a greater or lesser distance, depending on the ability of the one detecting them. And you have greater ability? Borlas smiled a tight little smile. Mostly I have years of experience. The important thing is, the beast is approaching rapidly. Most likely the attack on you will be tonight or tomorrow. This amulet you've made for me has a power which degrades over time. It may also be sensitive to certain moon phases and planetary configurations. Also, I've become aware that this thing differs from the usual construct in the matter of intelligence, for want of a better word. I cannot guarantee that it might not be able, by some means or other, to negate the power of the amulet. I'm sure you can explain why you didn't tell me this until now. Yes, I can, though the explanation sounds too much like an excuse. Basically, this thing was so new that it took some time to begin making guesses about its possible abilities. As time went on, though, and it came closer, I became aware of certain magical disturbances it was causing as it moved and killed. Worse, these are features which even I, with all my great expertise, his face twisted in a self-deprecating sneer, cannot interpret. Since I cannot interpret them, the wisest assumption I can make is that they mean a greater danger. It would follow, then, depending on any one line of defense would be unwise. I see. Ought I perhaps to camp outside the city for a few days? If this thing is going to slaughter its way through the city to get at me, I can imagine all Eldar being thrown into a panic by the time I defeat the thing. If I defeat the thing. Borla shrugged. Your choice, I suppose. I would prefer to think in terms of when we defeat the thing. Giving voice to a possibility of defeat seems ill-omened at worst. However, how soon can you be ready to move? I'd say instantly, but Third God's toe, can you imagine what instantly means to a prince's household? I think Hertria should come along. If this thing decides to kill its way through the city to get to her, then kill its way back out to get to me, camping out on the plains will have been no good purpose at all. Well, let's set things moving. His prediction of time it took to make this move proved very much an error. He could, of course, have taken it upon himself to march out with Hertria and the ever-present guards and spend a hungry, thirsty night. He thought it would be unfair, though, for the detachment of guards who would follow whatever orders he gave or did not give, and perhaps die as well, to suffer hunger and thirst as well. The matter of appropriating rations for the group was no difficult matter, but it allowed time and space for rumors to start. Requiring guards to be deaf to matters of policy discussed in their hearing was a thing that worked only imperfectly. Requiring them to keep something like this to themselves alone was probably expecting a little more than should be expected of any man. A soldier came rushing in about mid-afternoon. Lord Prince, there's rioting in the marketplace. Rumor has it that the prince is fleeing the city. Some says that there's been a sudden attack of Nanissas. Others say imperial troops, and still others say Rashvalati. There's even some that can claim to have seen flaming demons sent by the divine pair by the third god. Divine pair blast all idiots who spread rumors, and the worst idiots who listen to them. The prince's hand was on his sword, as though this buzz of fantastical rumors were something that could be fought with iron. At this rate, we're going to destroy the whole town if we leave. Even if we don't leave, the rumors that we're leaving the city that we're leaving are going to be hard to put down. I don't see how a Pranchka killing its way through the city could be any worse. If I ever track the rumor to one particular god's rotted lump of horse dung who started it, I'll swing him from the gibbet and cheer while he dies. So it was in a poor mood that the prince settled himself in for a night's rest. No, I won't undress. If this thing comes for me in the night, I won't be caught naked. This situation is like something like being in the field, with enemy in the vicinity. I'll lie down to sleep, but I'll do so in my armor jacket, with my sword at hand. How horrible, Hertria grinned wickedly. My husband would rather embrace his sword than me. Dolag pushed out a grin in answer. Actually, I'd much rather embrace you. But if this nasty thing comes in at night, I'd rather not try to swing you at it. Are you suggesting I'm heavy? She demanded in mock anger. Third god's toe, no. In fact, there's something to be said for having you fight against this thing. Your tongue is sharp enough to give even a magical construct pause. And now I'm a shrew, am I? Third God's toe, you're trying to exasperate me so badly that the only thing to do is to take you to bed, and then get caught by this construct not only naked, but in an embarrassing situation. She snickered. Ah, the great and sagacious strategist outmaneuvered. At the very least, give me a kiss. There was a rap at the door. Lord Prince! The voice was urgent. Doleg was awake and reaching for his sword. Come in. The man, 100 commander of cavalry, said, Lord Prince, something seems to have entered the town down by the river gate, and we've heard of sounds of disturbance moving this way. Thank you. Let me know immediately if there's any definite news. Word of the sighting of what's causing the trouble. Yes, Lord Prince. The 100 commander went out. Sounds of a disturbance. That, of course, is a discreet way of saying screams of people dying in terror. He checked the lacings on his armor. Guard, have someone summon Borlus. Yes, Lord Prince. Don't bother, said a familiar voice. Borlus is here. So the thing's come? Borlus looked as though he had just had a good night's rest, had then gotten up and gotten dressed without hurry. Seems to have. No one's reported back having seen what's causing the trouble, which in itself is something unusual. I think we'd best assume the worst until we know different. Oh, seems to has nothing to do with it. The thing has smashed through the riverward gate and killed at least 2 guards doing so. You recall the magical disturbances I'd mentioned? Well, they were present and clear enough to give me adequate warning. What's next? Well, I'd say we ought to move everyone we can out of its way. It's only killing everyone it comes across directly. I have a suspicion that, so close to its goal, it's less easily distracted. I know your guards won't like the thought, but the best they can do against it is to be killed. Guard, you heard Borlus. Take a message to the other guards, particularly those on the main door of the building, to move aside. They can't do anything in this case. But Lord Prince, I won't give my orders twice. Yes, Lord Prince. The man turned to leave, but had barely taken a step when something jarred through the whole building. There was a faint sound of something roaring. Too late. Guard, stay out of the way. I know you don't like that order, but against what's coming, you can only die uselessly. Borlus, you have everything you need? Lord Prince, Borlus responded, you manage military matters. Leave magical affairs to me. Another echoing roar. Closer this time. Doleg turned to Hertia. Get yourself out of here. No, go on. If the worst happens, you have to protect the child. Hertia had also slept fully dressed. If this thing comes, I won't be found in my nightdress, she had said. She hesitated only a moment over Doleg's command, then gave him a quick kiss. See to it you survive, too. She hurried out, escorted by a guard. Shouting and roaring sounded out in the hall. Guards, not understanding the fight was useless, were fighting the thing and dying. With a bang, the door splintered inward. A dark shape moved into the lamplight. A beast having the look of a mixture of a bear, lion, and wolf hesitated only an instant, then hurled itself toward Doleg. The guard, against orders, leapt between them, thrusting it with his spear. The spear splintered, its head falling to ring on the floor. A quick gray paw struck, and the guard was smashed bloodily out of the way. In the same moment, Borlus spoke a word that sounded like krish, and a gleaming sword was in his hand. He took the bare instant that had cost the guard his life, and stepped between the beast and the prince, striking with the sword. As the gleaming blade met the gray hide, there was a flash, and for a brief instant, Doleg thought he saw stitches in the beast's side. It roared again, and struck at Borlus. But it was as though it struck some deep-rooted old oak. Borlus swayed only a bit, then spoke another word as he struck again. Another flash. The beast screamed and struck again. Borlus swayed a bit more, but with one more word, he struck a third time. The beast staggered, then sprang a third time to smother the wizard. Borlus was barely able to interpose the sword, tip pointing toward the beast. Then he fell under its weight. In that instant, Doleg saw it change from a sleek, deadly beast to a mass of hides, roughly stitched together. The paws were rough lumps, with bone splinters to represent claws, and the jaws were only a small slash in the lumpy muzzle shape, with bone splinters to represent the fangs. Doleg swung his sword, cutting into the hide, with little effect but to reveal rags and leather and grass that had stuffed it. Whatever animated it, turned it into the deadly beast, was gone. If you wouldn't mind, Doleg, would you get someone to roll this thing off of me? Borealis was calm, though a little weak. Okay. That's the end of that. And so, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll talk to you all again next week. Thanks, everybody.